Welcome to the presentation. My name is Jim Giebutowski. I'm an independent education consultant at LifeLaunch College and Life Consulting. And what we're here to talk about is a calmer path to college admissions. So I think you probably sense already that this is and is going to be a stressful process, right? It's the first step you're taking into life. That's a major decision. And so one of the things I want to talk about is, or actually the theme of this presentation is, how do we make it less stressful, right? How do we plan ahead? How do we use tips and tricks to just make it more of a fun experience of self-exploration as opposed to kind of a grinding dirge, if you will. So I'm going to introduce myself. It's pretty, I guess I'm exposed because I know some of you know when I graduated here. So it's a very, very long time ago. And I'll tell you a little bit about myself. I was the shortest and slowest forward in the Tri-Valley League. There I am being beaten on a jump shot yet again. It wasn't good there. But we won that game, by the way, just so you know. So I was a musical theater actor, and I had two skills. The skills were height and unwarranted confidence. If you have those two things, you can be, as a guy, you can be successful in theater. So, and then I was in the band, the marching band. I didn't have any accomplishments, so I had no pictures. So just to prove that I was there, I took that picture this morning of my old, varsity letter. So here I am, 50 pounds heavier, 20 inches less of vertical leap, but hopefully a little less, a little wiser. My background, so I, pulled myself out of the spiral of high school and got myself an education at some pretty good places. So I'm a business grad, both undergrad and graduate. I was for a while a management consultant, so I did a lot of work with CEOs and CEOs of telco companies. Spent most of my career in high-tech sales and marketing, and was a small business owner for the last 12 years. So I bought a company and turned it into a kind of a multimedia voiceover services podcast company. And then now I'm a private college admissions counselor. And you probably are asking yourself, do you guys remember the Talking Heads? Remember the song? I can't sing the song, but, well, how did I get here, right? So, I have twin daughters. This is the first one, Allie. And you'll see why this is relevant in a second. So she's a character actress. If you think Carol Burnett from back those, she can sing or do any character role. So she's a singer, a rower, softball player, very much an extrovert, but also very sensitive. She was diagnosed with ADHD and dyslexia, but somehow she ended up being an A- student. And so, people are getting smarter about learning differences, and so that's very much a part of when you look at a college. That's something to consider. And I have this bolded because everyone has a different attitude going into the college search. So she was kind of in between jazzed and frazzled pretty much the entire process, right? So, and where she ended up in terms of majors, and this is very much a starting point, 75% of kids who go into college don't know what they're going to do, don't declare a major, right? So there's no pressure, there's no expectation that you're going in there studying something specific. And so she ended up at Lafayette in Pennsylvania, which ended up being a perfect fit for her. That's her sister. Very different. Musical theater actress, and a serious one. She's very, very good. She's trying to be on Broadway. Guitarist, political pundit, so we have very lively conversations at the dinner table. She's an introvert, believe it or not. You wouldn't know from the picture. Has anxiety and still is a pretty good student. I mean, she's an A+ or A- B+ student. Terrified of the college process, terrified. But she, we were able to kind of get her to rally, and she, after some self-exploration, decided she wanted to get a BFA, which is kind of the high-test version of education for actresses, and psychology, and this introvert and picky eater is going to school in New Orleans at Tulane. And I mention this just to personalize what I think the process is. So, you know, we don't have a large audience here, but enough about my kids. What about yours? I won't put you on the spot to characterize the folks here, but there's the perfect student who studies all the time, self-motivated, you know, just loves to have their nose in the books. Those tend to be about 5% of the people that college counselors work with. It sounds like, you know, at least the family we have here has somebody who is a serious student, but you do have students who are indifferent. You do have students who are scared of the process. And you have people who are freaked out, right? It kind of happens. So really, the beginning of this and then throughout is trying to assess the level of maturity that the student has, where they are in terms of their understanding of themselves, and that sets very, very critical context when you're kind of thinking through what your options are. So, you know, these are questions that sometimes I have the group talk about. I don't know if we need to necessarily do that here, but, you know, again, these are the things we try to tease out early on, but I want to focus on this one here because everything is central to what it is that you're passionate about. And it doesn't matter if it's something that's, you know, a high lofty goal or if it's playing cards or playing video games. Literally anything that you're passionate about is what should be driving the process. Parents, right? This is the way most parents start. This is where they sometimes end up. So that's so my goal here is to keep the stress level down. So these are the 4 guiding principles that I try to adhere to, and it really becomes the outline for the presentation. Start early and know the roadmap. I think roadmap you talked about, just knowing the steps, just knowing what's in front of you, and a fair amount of detail will actually bring the stress down if you get in front of it. Focus early and often on self-exploration and discovery. You know, particularly for folks who are freshmen and sophomores, that's a really great time to get some really good habits in place. But do things like read and journal, and some things that I'll talk about. Ease into resume building. And I put story building here in parentheses because when I iterate and do this next presentation, I think I'm just going to take the word resume out of it. Because it's really not. A resume is more for a professional. What you're really doing when you're building the application is building a story. And we'll talk about that in some detail. And then get familiar with simple research and management tools. AI is absolutely very, very helpful in this. As long as you're not over-relying on it, it can save a ton of time in the process. So first we should talk a little bit about the trends. Applications have been up significantly in the last decade, significantly. And acceptance rates are down at a lot of schools. I mean, a lot of schools that I thought of back when we all were looking at colleges, it was easy to get into certain places, right? Now, if you look at, these are 5 schools in the area, and they're kind of ordered in terms of selectivity. And if you do a comparison of the acceptance rates at these schools, you'll see that almost all of the acceptance rates have gone down. Look at Northeastern, 32%. I mean, when I was looking at colleges, you look at Northeastern, and you wouldn't have put them in the same category as some of these schools, but the reputation has skyrocketed there. And UMass has stayed steady, but you can see it's gotten competitive. Other things that are a factor is the SATs, which used to be and still are for the most part optional. A lot of schools are going back to actually requiring them. So the Ivy League schools in particular. Dartmouth was the first one, Harvard, Yale, Columbia, Cornell, University of Texas, a whole ton of schools, Georgia Tech. This year they're going to back to requiring them, and there's a whole nother raft the following year. And part of the next trends are really what the current administration is doing in terms of education. International students there might be mandates that suggest that the percentage of kids who can go to certain colleges will be capped. And it might be officially hard capped, depending on kind of where the discussion goes with the administration. But there's also a little bit of skittishness in the international community, which has an impact on acceptance rates for people who are domestic. It'll actually be a net positive for people here. Whether you think that's a good thing or a bad thing, it's, that's neither here nor there, but that's a reality. If you're a student in a marginalized community, DEI is under pressure, but opportunities still exist, right? So if, the kind of common understanding is that you can't use race in the admissions process. But in reality, if you can show that race or gender or some other identity is part of your growth and has presented challenges and you've overcome those challenges, that can legally be put into the bucket for consideration for admission. So I wouldn't, under any circumstances, if you're a student of color, you should walk into this undeterred and think creatively about how you can weave that into your message. Colleges are being squeezed financially. So if you look at some of the smaller liberal arts colleges, some of them may not make it over the next 5 years. So you have to kind of be cognizant and maybe even look into the financial status of these organizations. But the good news is the birth rates dropped, right? So you think about 2008. The recession came and people stopped having kids at the rate they used to have kids at. And so now the class of 2025, the class that my daughters went through, was probably the apex of difficulty in terms of getting into those colleges. So senior class is going to drop from 4 million to 3.2 million. So pretty significant. But schools are still taking a holistic approach. GPA is extremely important. The number of APs is extremely important. I've just spent time at 5 different schools over the last 3 weeks. All of them will tell you that they take what's called a context-based approach, where they're looking at the whole kid. Your activities, you should really focus on quality over quantity, and does it fit into a story? That's kind of the biggest thing, is can you consistently put in achievements that weave together in a way that makes sense and really tells the story of who you are? And then, is it authentic? And that's a big piece of this. And then student aid is more available than you think. So most of the schools that I've been visiting over the last couple months they provide 100% of the demonstrated need. So what I'll tell students who are in lower and middle income brackets is, don't assume that you're not, don't throw away, I don't say throw away an opportunity, but don't not pursue an opportunity because you don't think you're going to get aid. It's amazing what some of these schools are doing now. And then 80% of US colleges accept over half their applicants. So there's really a school for everybody. So the stages, in the interest of time, I'm going to go really fast on these because I know some of you are down the road a bit. For folks who are starting out, there's really kind of 3 approaches. This one I call the too much too early approach, whereas you walk into 8th grade and the parent is all over the kid, and little Johnny and little Joanne are spending an inordinate amount of time on college, and that continues consistently at a high level. What I'm representing here really is the amount of time and effort spent on the process. By the time you get to junior year, you're stressed. It causes stress, but it also causes family tension. And the kid's not in the driver's seat. I mean, that's one of the worst outcomes, right? That's what you don't want. You want the kid in the driver's seat. Then there's too little, early and too much late. So you go through, sleepwalk through the first 3 years, halfway through junior year, all of a sudden it's on top of you, right? And then all of a sudden you look back and you say, geez, I know when I think about the process I went through, I wish I had known that grades were as important as they are, because I didn't know how selective these schools were. I mean, we went in with our kids, they presented this list. I don't know what your experiences were, but they just drew a line. They said, here are all the schools in the tiers. You're probably not going to be eligible above this line. And I was just absolutely surprised at how competitive it is. And then so what happens is you spend all this time, and then now you're really spending a lot of time beginning of the year, and you're probably still trying to decompress at the end. 75% of the stress comes from, the push at the end. And then you get panicked, and then you're making decisions not necessarily based on data or preferences, but just kind of what's in front of you. So the ideal trajectory I like is you start, and we'll go over this in each year individually, just kind of ease into it for the first couple years. And then sophomore year start to gain some momentum, because we know junior year is really the year that matters the most. And then, if you can get between junior and senior year, that summer and early senior year, if you can get ahead of the game, the stress level just goes down. If you do it right. So the principle is nudged, not shoved. That's the way I think about it. So the benefit of the approach is it builds the student's self-confidence, builds the relationship with the family, which is a big plus, reduces stress, and spreads out the workload. Freshman year, what I recommend is really upfront, take stock at what the child's mental health situation is, right? Even if somebody doesn't show any outward signs of something that's obvious, it's just something to make sure it's on your radar. With my daughter, we knew that she excelled in a classroom environment, class participation, but she found herself taking literally 50% more time with tests because we didn't know why, and it didn't seem to be an effort issue. And so we diagnosed her, fortunately, at the beginning of sophomore year, but I think the signs were there. The other thing that I recommend is if you have a passion about something, or even if you're interested in it, try to get your child to read. I know that my dad, when I was thinking about engineering, put a copy of Design News on my desk and said, hey, you want to be in engineering? Take a look at this. But for me, I went through it and my eyes started glazing over. It just wasn't my thing. Now, I ended up going to college and getting really interested in computer science, so it kind of came back. But I'm glad that personally glad that I didn't go for engineering, although it's where a lot of money is, so I wouldn't discourage it. Let's put it that way. Study habits, right? So it's all of these things, by the way, are things that you would do normally, hopefully, as a parent of a student, right? There's nothing really college specific about a lot of this stuff. Study habits are obviously important. Teacher relationships, and one of the reasons why is you're going to want to go to these teachers with recommendations, to ask for recommendations. And if you haven't really gotten the habit of establishing a relationship with a parent, it's hard to all of a sudden from ground zero say, hey, you've got to approach this adult and ask for some of their time, a significant amount of their time, right? So you want to have the child get into the flow of that. And then the fall is really when you start thinking about curriculum for the next second half of freshman year. You're not really talking about APs, but you might be talking about honors classes versus regular classes, because you have what's called the weighted GPA, which is just A, B, C, D, and then the weighted GPA, they take into account, did you take honors classes, did you take AP classes, did you take IB classes, and so forth. I always recommend people, to the extent there's an interest and passion, to volunteer in some way, shape, or form for service, because colleges really, really like that. And then what I call summer enrichment, which is how you spend the following summer. And the key thing here, and I think it's in another slide, is you really want to get on top of that in the winter before and do your research, because the application process for some of these programs are earlier than you think. So that's just something to take away from that. So explore passions, just be a kid, right? Just be a kid. And I would say that through sophomore year too. You don't get to be in high school once, right? You don't want to be stressing out. You want to have memories, you want to have fun, but get good grades. Sophomore year, another year of more self-exploration. So summer programs, we'll talk about those individually in a bit. Curriculum, now you're starting to talk about, does the kid have the academic horsepower to handle AP courses, right? And start to make some choices depending on what the interest levels are. And then there's club leadership, right? Even in the sophomore year. And college counselors have told me consistently, leadership is not necessarily always being president of the class, right? Let's just say you're in a science club and you're not the president, but you come up with a research project that does something very specific in mechanical engineering, and you're kind of driving some new idea. They'll look at that and say that that's leadership, if you can show a demonstrated outcome. And then once you get into sophomore year and even early junior year, there's a series of tools, personal assessments, that are pretty simple, and I have a couple examples further in the presentation, that get to not only what your interests and passions are, but things around learning style that might give you hints in terms of the kinds of colleges that you want to go to. And that's kind of the time to do it. So in a typical full engagement with an independent counselor, I know that if I get a sophomore, I'm not going to spend a lot of time with the sophomore. It's going to be mostly junior year, but the thing that I am going to do is I am going to do some kind of personal assessment, because that falls under this, self-exploration, right? And then, if I put this as a gray line, because going to see a college sophomore year, if the student is not ready for it, I wouldn't push it on somebody, but if the student is ready for it, it's a good time to spend maybe part of your break going to a couple colleges. So I call that kind of toe in the water, if you will. So more self-exploration, start the planning, and still kind of, keep it chill. First half of junior year, all right? So now we're kind of really into it. And by the way, junior year, I'm presuming that's last summer, right? So summer programs, test prep. So, and you can do contracted test prep. We use a company called Revolution, but you can also do test prep without external help. But it's a good time to, and I don't know if I said it in the last slide, but you probably will have taken your PSATs at that point. You'll have an idea of what your baseline is. And then I always put mental health here. I don't have anything specific to say about it, but it's just so important that you be watching that as kind of time goes on through junior year. So right around end of fall, sometimes early winter is really the first initial list. And I say initial because the list generally for most people changes and evolves over time, right? So, I look at the list that we came up originally, and it's ended up being completely different than where they ended up ultimately applying. But what I like to do is suggest that I call it the 3 locals. So a lot of kids will apply across the nation, but if you want to do a kind of a low-stress version, find a dimension of a school that you think might be relevant. For example, a small school, a medium-sized school, a large school, or an urban school, a suburban school, a school that's in the middle of nowhere, right? So then you start to get a sense of what you like. And it's kind of a low-stress way to do it. That's where, and I have these 2 things bolded because they're probably the most important, in that now you're at the point where you're trying to develop your story. I'm a business person. I think about the world in terms of a brand, right? And it sounds impersonal, but having a brand that you can identify, kind of what your value proposition in the business world is to the world, is a very, very important exercise to go through, because then that can guide and become the common thing that runs through the application process. So you start that kind of fall of junior year, and then continue to try to find situations where you can be a leader. Now, I did say that you don't have to be president. That having been said, if you look at a college application, they'll actually score, depending on the school that you go to, they'll actually score if you were the head of the club, an officer in the club, or if you're in performing arts, were you a lead in the show, were you, in the ensemble. they'll actually assign points to that. So it is relevant and something to think about. You don't have to be leader of everything, right? But that's a consideration. And then in the fall, you'll probably take your first SAT. Now, this is the first half, and a lot of this goes into the winter. If we go to, and the other thing is, any activity that you do outside of grades, try to quantify the impact, right? So it's not the tasks or activities that you did in your extracurricular activities or in your summer work or in your job. It's how can you quantify that, and then how can you show that that made an impact, hopefully at the world at large. That's obviously a big, that would be a big plus. And then, again, don't freak out about the first list, because it's just, you're going to iterate on it. Okay, and then in the second half, that's big time college visits. Personally, I don't think it's worth, it's much better to go to the college when the kids are there, right? So I don't like summer visits as much, right? Because you want to get a sense of the vibe of the place, right? And it's difficult, depending on what your school's policies are. A lot of places will allow you to take time off. That's really what the people do with their break junior year, is they kind of stack them up and go see them. Continuing the story development, again, summer plan again. And this is the point where you can make a decision whether you were going to take the SATs and continue to kind of, bust on that, or are you better off not reporting your SATs and putting your time and effort into other things. Now, if you're gunning for the real top schools, now we're seeing that they're taking them, so you're really kind of committed to taking them. But that's a strategy, so you may not necessarily need to take them. And what they say is you can improve your SAT scores. It's been shown that you can improve them almost up to 100 points. But once you take it the third time, chances are, and you can take them almost a million times, but after that, you're probably not going to be able to get a lot more juice out of that squeeze, right? We stopped. My girls just don't test well, right? So why put them through the stress of it when they can take that time and do something on the leadership side? And the personal statement, which is, again, it's the Common App, right? So it's generally 600 to 650 words, and it's really your story, right? And that personal statement will be submitted to all the schools that take the Common App, which is most of them. So I like to make sure people start in the wintertime on that, because you really want to get ahead of the curve. You want to ask early for the recommendations. This is where the stress part comes in. This is where if you wait till here, right, you're going to your physics teacher in May, and already your whole class has gone to that physics teacher because that physics teacher is popular. That's stressful. Do it here, try to see if you can get that commitment early. And then the curriculum, that's where you try to get the APs that you can handle, but not more than what you can handle. So, get in front of summer, and breaks are for visits. And then senior year, right? So instead of putting just the generic word, these are all the different kinds of options for summer, right? By that point, you may have a little bit more self-awareness about how you're positioning yourself from a brand standpoint, and that's where you might want to make a strategic choice about which, either a college camp or a pre-professional camp, or some kind of job that reflects your interests. And then the personal statements, and each of the schools generally have supplements. So you have your your personal statement, and then there's schools that have specific questions, maybe one or two questions. So you're going to spend probably a lot of time. If you get that personal statement nailed down early, you can work on your supplements. Iteration on the list, and then, these portals, the schools have portals where you sign in electronically, and they open up in the summer, right? So you can get a head start on this in the summer between junior and senior year. Financial aid, one of the biggest mistakes that families make. First of all, they think they're not eligible, but they also start late, right? So you should by September for sure be talking about and thinking about financial aid of senior year, and then getting your early decision and early action stride. Do you guys know the difference between early decision? Okay, right. So you're down the curve there. All right. So I'm seeing these dates start to come in earlier now. It used to be November 15th. A lot of schools are November 1st now. Wake Forest, you can actually, I think, as early as August apply if you're interested in Wake Forest. Maybe we see more schools do that. And then you've got early decision 2, which generally used to be January 15th. We're seeing more now January 1st. And then RD, some of these RDs are also at the same time as ED1. I mean, it used to be March or February. That's starting to slide in that direction. And then submission and negotiation. And I added negotiation because I heard from somebody that they got a financial aid package and they said, oh, no. Can you give me more, right? You have no reason not to ask, right? Ask. That's really important. And hey, if you can have all your applications done by Thanksgiving, that's a really good goal. Because then even if you by then you may have already found out if you got into your ED1. But yeah, so there you go. The next few, and let's just do a quick time check. So I want to make sure okay. These next sections are a little bit quicker. So we're going to talk about self-exploration, why it's important. So think about this in terms of who I am, which is a function of your values and your strengths, what I love doing, and then what's the environment where I'm going to thrive. And that's really where, in that middle there, is where you want your college list to kind of focus on. And it's something that when you talk to college admissions counselors, they can kind of suss out authenticity in an application, right? Because there's a ton of kids who want to get into Ivy League schools or close to Ivy League schools, and they're going to say and do things that perhaps aren't really them. But if you find somebody that's put together an authentic story that really is them, it's their DNA, that's going to really resonate. And when you self-explore, the student will have more ownership, right? They'll have more ownership over the process, be more happy with the college choice ultimately. And then that will, in turn, kind of clear the path to success in early adulthood. I don't remember who told me this. If you don't know who you are, you're chasing somebody else's college maps. Certainly don't let it be your parents' map. But don't worry about anybody else. Don't worry about the person who sits next to you in physics, whether they're applying at Harvard or Yale or Northwestern or anywhere. Just, what's your map? So the personal statement, it's the glue that holds the whole application together. This is probably one of the most important and stress-inducing parts of the process. Some people write naturally, right? But in reality, it's a process that can be broken down. You have kids who are good at math and science to say that they're not good writers. And when you find somebody who's a good essay coach, there's a very specific way that you can kind of break this down and yet still have some level of creativity and authenticity in the process. So self is, again, who you are. The story is how you communicate it through essays, through interviews, which I don't spend a lot of time on here. There's some places still do interview, and then all the activities, all these things we talked about. Compelling and unique, that's really important. I have a cousin who, not a great student, not a terrible student, he loves creepy crawly things. That's always been, when he was a kid, he used to go out onto the beach and take his shovel and, put things in a bucket, and that obsession has kind of lived with him, and he has a learning disability. And I can tell you that a college counselor who sees a story that's unique and compelling around that kid might get the last spot over somebody with a higher GPA because their story is better, right? So these two things, take that out of this section, is be compelling, be unique, don't be boring. the average college admissions counselor spends 6 minutes with an application. 6 minutes, that's all you get. So the goal is use self-exploration to generate insights into these things. Reading is just so important. And rather than say, give the kid a bunch of books that you think are great, what is it that your child is curious about, right? That's the important thing. And then not only that, ask why your student is interested, why they gravitate to certain subjects. That gets them thinking about other questions about themselves, and you kind of get on a little bit of a roll. This is a great way to pre-testing for, if you're trying to figure out your major, right? That's why I got that engineering news book, right? And then reading in general, there's a strong correlation with a high GPA in general. And then journaling is one of the best ways that you can prepare yourself to put together the personal statement. If you write a journal, and some kids will share their journals with their parents, some won't. Even if the child doesn't share the journal, you can ask the question, well, what do you write about? You don't have to tell me the specifics, right? And that's a great hint in terms of what the actual essay should be about, because you can go back, right? Reread your journal and see how have your values evolved and what have you learned from when you started to where you are now. And these things also give hints in terms of how students learn, which in turn can help align to what the right college choice should be. Like I said, great input for the personal statement. Right? So here's the questions you don't ask. What do you want to major in? It's not a bad question, right? But that's kind of general. What job do you want to have this summer? Or what camp do you want? What clubs, will get my kids into college? Do ask, what classes do you love, right? What don't you love and why? What is it about it that you love or don't love? What kinds of things do you want to explore this summer? Particularly in those early summers, right? You can be really broad, and then you start narrowing it down. What clubs would fire you up? And you know what the great thing is? I went to, was it Northwestern? No, University of Chicago. I was there yesterday. And this is a college, it's not a high school thing. They have a zombie apocalypse club on campus. So what the club does is they go around to all the buildings and they give it a engineering rating on if there was a zombie apocalypse, would you be safe or not? So you could actually so if it's something like that, it's amazing what kids will come up with. There's, get a book, have you ever heard of a book called The College Essay Guy? Yeah, yes, great, it's a great book. Right, so exploratory, not directive. Normalize ambiguity depending on if your child likes structure. It's how do you model the fact that ambiguity, something like the college search process is ambiguous, is how do you make that comfortable, right? I mean, that's life, right? It's not a prescribed path. Questions are, I think, better than advice giving. It certainly was, I didn't learn that until, I was down the road with my girls. And then encourage curiosity about each other's values and stories. And, I know mistakes and regrets in parent stories, believe it or not. My wife, she went to Yale, and she's like, I hated Yale. Hated it. She was in the hockey team. She was a D1 athlete. Hated it. Wish she went to Williams or some other place. And, kids, if you're vulnerable, right, that's just a great way to get the kids' attention. I mean, yeah, it's tough. The other one is games, right? Fun kind of loosens up the tongue of young kids. So, right, kids not talking, yeah, mine didn't. Even my extrovert didn't talk. It's like, want to talk about college? I don't want to talk about it. Not now. It's like, okay, when do you want to talk about college? So, you know that game? You ever heard of that? Rosebud Thorn? So Rosebud Thorn is, we would do it around the table, and what did you love about the day you rose? What was your thing you're looking forward to is the bud, and thorn is what was the thing that really made your day awful. Two truths and a lie. It's kind of a college game, but that's a fun one. You can lie more the older they get about yourself, because you're playing the game too. You're not just, right? The card sort was my favorite. So what I did with Ceci is the one who was terrified. Right? So we must have had 18, because she was looking at BFA schools and BA schools, so fine arts, regular. So we had a very long list. So I took index cards and I put the names of the colleges on there. I went out to a restaurant, put it on the table, and said, okay, split these up into 3 different piles, right? Schools that you're really jazzed about, schools, not so jazzed about, and schools, you just, not really. And then, okay, take each stack, and then you're going to rank them. So we're in Paparazzi's in Wellesley, and she's, stacking these things up, and the waitress is coming by and saying, what are these people doing, right? But the great thing is you can say, okay, why did you pick Denison over Colgate? It's like, well, what about this one? How come this one's so low? And then we talk about it. So maybe that one should be higher. Or it's like, maybe you really don't like that one, right? So it's better than like, what did you think of Denison? Right? I don't know, Dad. It was okay, right? It's a game. You can make it a game. Personal assessment tests. These are 3 good ones. AchieveWorks is specific to colleges, right? So the strong inventory is done on a professional level. That's more for career, but that's also interesting. Used for colleges, not only interesting values, but again, learning styles, right? Learning styles are things like, do you like to study in groups? When you're in a classroom, do you like to have a lot of discussion in the classroom? Would you rather sit back and take notes? I'm an extrovert. I didn't particularly like class participation. I wanted to get my notes down. No one's going to slow me down, right? And I'm just going to just power through it. That's just the way that my mind thinks. But other kids like Allie, she's just like the leader in the classroom, and she's getting other people involved. It's good to kind of know that, because then you're going to go to your college list and you're going to be able to find out what kind of lead environment is it at each of these colleges that you're really going to thrive in. Strong inventory is good for careers. What it does is it takes interest, it asks about 80 questions, and then it clusters them and it matches them in a career. But again, with the whole daddy life school thing that I told you about, it was a good kind of contrast. We never did this one. But I learned about this one through my training, but this was really, really interesting. And then College Success Factor Index, it goes beyond the interest and starts talking about kind of your mental wellness, your relationship with your family, time management, some interesting other kinds of things. And again, we try to do this, if you can, do it sophomore year, end of sophomore year. So take them yourself too. I mean, I took a strong inventory myself, and then the siblings, to the extent that, you have them. Okay, so they're going to come for us in about 3 minutes. So again, lead with guiding principles for stories, for activities. Depth is better than breadth. You should build a story. Leadership matters. And like I said, it comes in different forms. And then document and quantify impact as you go. Those are the kind of the guiding principles. And then again, any kind of program that's in the summer, try to get on top of that the January or February before. Right, so there's the ones that are in school, which is clubs and awards, right? So it's all the sports and arts clubs, vocational things that are associated with various professions, and then interest-based clubs as well. If you have any awards or competitions that you can enter, those are highly regarded when looked at by counselors. I didn't do a good job myself when I was in high school looking at those. I had a classmate of mine, Jennifer Goodall, who literally every single opportunity she had, and she got into Harvard, right? So, look for those opportunities. And then the summer programs, which I'm going to give you a few examples here. There are schools that put on summer programs, and we'll talk about that. But then there's also ones for business and for engineering, which I think if you have a business and engineering background, that's something to consider. Because then, in addition to understanding that for college, you understand it for yourself. Like robotics clubs and cyber, and those are highly regarded. And then I call these passion-based, which is if you can find an opportunity to do research, whether it's associated with somebody at your school or on the outside, that's all very big for engineering. Community service, and then jobs and internships. So those are kind of the buckets. Just some examples. And I try to give examples that are along the selectivity curve. So Brown has a really good program. And what this does is it shows intellectual curiosity, which is Brown's very, very big on that. And then UMass Amherst has a good pre-college program. So what you could do is you could go to that program if you're kind of not at the level of Ivy in terms of academics. You can kind of figure out how well do I tolerate these harder classes, and should I take AP classes, right? Am I ready for them? Or it could help you get ready for them. And then also there's schools that for students who are less academically inclined yet talented, Endicott has a really nice program, and it's more of a kind of a nurturing and very supportive kind of environment. These are kind of more, performing arts is a very different animal. So for folks who are serious about doing performance arts professionally and they're out to get a BFA, that is a very competitive process. So it's harder to get into some of these schools than it is to become a D1 linebacker at University of Michigan, right? So I know that Ceci went to the Boston Conservatory Intensive. She came out of that. They had her dancing and singing from 8 a.m. to 10 p.m. And at the end of it, she said, "Dad, I can't handle it. It's just not me." She ended up getting going for a BFA, but it was a scaled back BFA. So we learned a lot. Just going there and not liking it is a data point, right? And then Walnut Hill is a performing arts school here right around the area in Natick that puts on a really great, they're kind of a big combination of academics and professional training. So business and entrepreneurship, this is a really great way. If you have an interest in business, there are some really good programs. Wharton is probably the gold standard, something called Wharton Global Youth. What they do is they actually put together a business as if they're going for venture capital money, right? And then they have case studies that are involved, and they might even get the founders of these companies to come in and talk about the case studies. So that's a really, really impressive one. Babson, which is right here, right? You build sales pitches. You get up there, you build a value proposition for a product and service, and you present it. That's just a great way to, feel what it's like to be in business, right? And they, schools that have business undergrads programs loved seeing this on the resume. Bentley Wall Street. You pick stocks. They have these Bloomberg terminals where you've probably seen them on TV where you can actually make picks, right? And they do international finance. They do fintech, financial technology. So these are really good programs to think about going from junior year to senior year in particular. So, and this is one where you can kind of really get practice at quantifying things. That's big. Engineering and tech, there's just a ton of these, right? MIT Beaverworks, it's the most selective. They're on top of the big trends: AI, robotics, cybersecurity. Those three areas are the future right there, right? And they look at a kid who does that and says they're engaged, they kind of know where they're going. That was a copy and error mistake, so I'm not sure what I was meant to say there. And then Wentworth. Wentworth is more kind of applied learning and theoretical. Somebody who maybe is not an engineering student, but they are more kind of computer science. It's a great program for that. And then the last part of it is what I call passion-based interests, turning passion into purpose. And this concept I love: do, demonstrate, and donate. So an example would be, let's say that you are in your high school and you do a little project on single-use plastics, right? You do the research, right? That's doing. Demonstrating is going to the school board and making a presentation saying this is the quantification of why this is a bad thing. And then donating is, okay, let's take that and put it into action, take it downtown and go around town and get people to use, recyclable containers. So if you can get to this level, that's the thing that makes it a story as opposed to just a set of activities. And then the last section, just some resources that I like. Search and list generation. Fisk's is that big book. I don't know if you've seen it. Not Fisk's Downtown, right? SCORE is what high schools generally use. The nice thing about SCORE is for every school you can look up. I don't know if this is the case at all high schools, but it'll put on a grid, put GPA on one side, SATs on one side, and they'll say, here are the students who applied from this school. They anonymize it, and this is where this kid got in, this kid didn't get in, right? That's a great tool. And then Niche, I think, is one of the better sites in terms of just rankings, doing sorting and criteria based on programs. These are less known. This won't give you the probability of getting into a school. Acceptance rate doesn't necessarily capture that, because you get a different kind of kid applying to a Harvard or Yale than a kid from Boston College or a kid at UMass. But admission probability, I jumped onto College Data over the past week or so. That's a great resource. I don't know as much about CapEx, but I've heard it's good. Then financial aid. FAFSA, of course, is the application you put in for financial aid. But there's a tool that takes literally like 10 minutes to fill out. It's called My Intuition. And you just put in, you ask 6 questions, answer 6 questions, and it'll give you a general sense of what your needs-based, what your ability is to pay. It literally takes like 10 minutes to do. So that's a great resource. Logistics and visits. So there's college visits, which will help you do all the logistics of where do you stay when you come here, what other schools can you go to in the area, how do you get there, what are the transportation options. College Planner Pro is a tool that I use with my clients. It's kind of expensive, but I would go with this. And then prompt.com has all of the supplemental questions that the schools ask and assistance in filling them out. College Essay Guide we talked about. And then general support. I like Google Sheets because if you're working with either a counselor or you're working with your parents, it's a shared spreadsheet that everybody can, as opposed to kind of working with Excel and passing it back and forth. And then my last slide is ChatGPT. I gotta tell you, I added this slide, you guys. Selecting majors. It's a tool called My Majors. 15-minute questionnaire. And what it does is takes your strengths and interests, and then it put it into an engine, and it kind of spits out the kinds of majors that you think might be interesting. So definitely check that one out. Use Science is a little bit more involved. It does some level of formal aptitude tests, and then it makes a major match for you. And there's hundreds of majors. Now, I think the great value of doing this is you'll see majors that you never even considered by just going through the process. And then College Find Major Finder, it not only matches it to the major, but it matches it to this college, specific college. And it also tells you kind of the percentage admissions rate for each of those majors as well. So that's kind of one level up. And then lastly, AI, indispensable, right? I sometimes use it to do the list. I think initial list generation, I think, is more art than science. But once you get into trying to compare them, you can say, hey, I'm a economics major, I want a middle-sized school, I want it to be close to a city, it's got to have great sports teams, and then it'll actually spit out and give you an analysis of Wake Forest versus Boston College. It's a really cool way to do it. If you want to figure out, just make a grid of application deadlines, say, ChatGPT, generate a spreadsheet of these 15 schools when their ED, EA, and RD programs are. And then visit logistics. I mean, you can use, I like the college.visits piece of it, but if you want to do something fast, just put it into ChatGPT. The last thing, this is just kind of my pitch. Don't do it all yourself. There's just a lot of stuff that, and even if you do all the right things and get as much stress out of it as you can, it's just a lot of work. So I'm available as a college counselor. Thank you very much, Holliston Cable TV, for all your support.